Department of Mental Health. Brought to you by the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and the Department of Psychiatry. So welcome to have you. We got an interesting speaker today. Before we get to Mark, I wanted to mention that next week it'll be Dr. Fink, a new faculty member here, and she'll be talking about addictions and families. And so we look forward to her presentation for next week. But for today, we have Mark Woodward. Mark has presented for us before in the past. Is always a good presentation, very interesting. People find it fascinating, his perspective on substance use in Oklahoma. It's always informative and fact-filled, and so we're glad we got Mark back. Just a few things about Mark. He graduated, as you can see there, from UConn, University of Oklahoma. Is currently with Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics as information officer. So he is uniquely prepared to tell us about substance use in Oklahoma. So Mark, glad to have you. We'll, without any further ado, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you all very much. And I'm going to go to share screen here and make sure everybody can see my presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started. Is everybody seeing that okay? How does that look? Everybody seeing it okay? Good. Yeah. I see some thumbs up. As he mentioned, I'm Mark. Thank you. I'm Mark Woodward with the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. I've been with the agency 28 years, and this is an issue that is probably more concerning than any other drug-related issue we've ever dealt with before, just because of the uniqueness of it. We've certainly seen the evil and destruction caused by so many other drugs, from methamphetamine, which continues to be our number one killer, to in just rapid increase in the potency of marijuana products affecting our youth. But the fentanyl is a whole different animal because of just how addictive it is, but because of just the inexact science involved in the people who are putting it on the streets and what they don't know about the products that they themselves are putting on the streets, let alone law enforcement and innocent family members, first responders, and others that come upon this drug that must be treated so much differently than any other type of drug that we've ever dealt with. And so we'll kind of get into that a little bit of how we got here. It is a fantastic drug when it comes to the medical application of fentanyl, and it's been used for and it continues to be in use today for a number of medical legitimate purposes. But obviously, with anything that makes the brain say, I like this behavior, there's going to be people who are going to feed that craving, all for the sake of profit. And so that's where over the last 4 decades, we've seen more and more fentanyl going from the legitimate market through the diversion onto the criminal and addictive market, both medical fentanyl as well as the black market clandestine produced fentanyl. And so it is really just absolutely, since about 2012, at the height of the opioid crisis, is when we really saw things take off, because from about 2001 until 2012, we started to see a lot of new painkillers hit the market that we'd never dealt with before. Things like hydrocodone, oxycodone, Roxicet, Percocet, and OxyContin. And as more and more people were put on these opiates, our addiction and our dependence upon opiates continued to increase across the globe, but especially here in the United States. And as this opioid epidemic took off, so did new legislation to try to curb opioid prescribing, more education in our medical treatment facilities, our medical schools about how do we prescribe it. And so from about 2012 through 2018, we started to see a decrease and a smarter use of fentanyl and other opiates to treat pain. As a result, doctors started prescribing less. They were cutting people off. We started to have a worldwide prescription monitoring program. So the days of going from ER to ER seeking pain medicine to feed your addiction was over. The doctors take 26 seconds to run your PMP, and they can now tell the difference between somebody who's got true pain and somebody who is scamming doctors and ERs to try to feed an addiction. So as we started cutting people off in the medical setting, it started forcing more people to the streets to get these drugs that would either be stolen from family members or mass produced on the synthetic variety. And that's where we started to see more and more heroin in the United States become more mainstream among opioid addicts, replacing heroin, replacing oxycodone since 2012, and just continuing to take that path. As I said, obviously legitimate uses. It has a very effective use for sedation for certain types of procedures, and certainly in large enough levels, it can have a sedation effect and a tranquilizing effect for large animals, and certainly for very, very painful types of medical issues, burn patients, cancer patients. It has a legitimate place, but certainly as I said, as our society has said, wow, I like how opiates make my brain feel, we're seeing more and more people who are branching out to make sure that they are the supplier that is capitalizing on this epidemic and this craving for opiates. And that's where you started to see more fentanyl reaching the United States. As I said, this isn't anything new. There was a brilliant gentleman by the name of George Marquardt, who back in the 70s could picture molecules in his head, and then he could go down into his basement lab, cook them up and try them. And he realized back in the 70s and 80s that heroin addicts would hit a tolerance. They would need something stronger to get to the same point, and they weren't reaching it. There was nothing out there to fill that craving that opioid fentanyl addicts, heroin addicts were truly seeking. And so he created a drug through just trial and error, through his brilliance, called 3-methylfentanyl, it became known as China white heroin. And as you can see kind of in that chart there, you can compare heroin to fentanyl to what his China white is. And that's not really even a fair comparison. When you see that little dot there that says 3-methylfentanyl, that's really not accurate. If you cut that little dot into 30 seconds, which you could barely see, that would be enough to produce a high, and for many people produce an overdose and potential death. He knew this, and he made 1 gram of it, about the size of an artificial sweetener packet, put it in an empty cement mixer out in his backyard.
Empty envelope.
Oh, okay.
He filled the rest of it with some sort of a cutting agent, and he let this stir and cut it for 3 days. He put it out on the streets on the East Coast, and it has been identified as being responsible for at least 126 deaths on the East Coast from 1991 to 92. George Marquardt ended up going to prison in 1993. It was actually our agency that arrested him through an investigation, even though he was a manufacturer for 3-methylfentanyl throughout the United States. And he spent about the next 24 years in Leavenworth, Kansas, before passing away back in 2017 or 2019. But unfortunately, his recipe is still all over the internet. And so we see amateur chemists and people who think they know what they're doing actually buying the raw materials on the dark web and manufacturing their own synthetic opiates that could be very close to his 3-methylfentanyl, but it's still something strong enough to where when an opioid addict gets a tolerance to hydrocodone and then oxycodone and even heroin, that now there's that next level for them to strive for, to feed that addiction that's causing the dope sick. And ultimately, the addicts will tell you that's what they're seeking. They're at a point in their life, they're no longer trying to get high. They're trying to keep the sickness at bay. And that is their pursuit from 30-minute increments to hour to 2 to 3 hours. It's just what will get me out of the dope sick that they're going through. And certainly when word got out about 3-methylfentanyl killing at least 126 people, instead of people being afraid of it, they couldn't get enough of it. They were racing onto the streets to get this in places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Boston, because in their minds, they're all what we all call chasing the dragon. They're all trying to get that high they used to get, that fed the craving that they're no longer seeking. And in their minds, if 126 people just died from this particular product, well, that must be what's strong enough to get me not only out of the dope sick, but get me back to that pleasure that my brain is craving. And so it's scary to think that the more people that die from a drug, the more popular it will become among addicts who are in their active addiction. And our main sources today are not people like George Marquardt, it's China. China, for the longest time, the last 10 years or so, had been the largest producer of black market fentanyl. And China has since banned fentanyl from being manufactured in its country. However, China has not banned the raw materials from being produced. And so China is now the number one supplier of raw chemicals that go into manufacturing black market fentanyl and shipping them either directly into the United States through cargo containers, partnering with cartels out of Mexico, where they ship it to Mexico, and then the drug cartels in Mexico manufacture the fentanyl and move it in. Or it's coming, we've even intercepted some of the raw materials through the Postal Service. But that is just the demand for it is absolutely like nothing we've ever seen before. And it comes in so many different forms and every color under the rainbow. These are just a few examples. But the most popular method for fentanyl being delivered and absorbed today by an addict are these counterfeit oxycodones that side by side will look just like US pharmaceuticals, specifically the M30s. They will buy the raw materials in Mexico. They will buy pill presses that you can get all over the internet, but they also manufacture through mass commercial pill presses that can produce 3,000 pills a minute. And they buy stamps or manufacture their own stamps that look just like the US M30 counterfeit, and it is a counterfeit, but most of the addicts on the streets today that are overdosing have no idea that they're now getting fentanyl. They still think it's the oxycodone because their dealer, whoever their supplier is, still thinks that they're moving oxycodone. They didn't realize that there had been a switch over in, say, the last anywhere from the last 4 to 8 years, that their ultimate sources, whether it's out of Mexico, El Paso, Phoenix, Tijuana, San Diego, wherever it's coming in, has already switched over to the cheaper fentanyl, but much more powerful fentanyl. And so that's one of the reasons it is so popular today. It can be as strong as heroin, but yet it costs a fraction to manufacture fentanyl compared to opium poppies that have to be grown, processed, manicured, then moved into heroin, and then processed into a street version of it. Whereas the fentanyl can be produced for literally pennies on the dollar. And in fact, most heroin obviously can go for a piece on the streets. And so, and of course, when you're selling 10, 20, 40 at a time, you can see how much money is absolutely being made by these drug trafficking organizations. Across the top there, you see Gray Death at U47,700. Again, this was a synthetic opioid that mimicked the effects of fentanyl. It's basically a different version of it. Same with Pink. Pink is a different type version of fentanyl that's manufactured from the raw materials from China. Those 8 baggies that you see of pills there, that was nearly 8,000 pills that we intercepted that came through the mail from the Postal Service to an apartment complex in Oklahoma City. That were for distribution, and certainly any one of those pills could have killed somebody. But what is very concerning is that most of the people who are supplying it none of them are trying to kill people. They simply don't understand that they're selling fentanyl, and they don't understand just how powerful and in any exact science it can be, where it can be as strong as heroin. It can be 100 times stronger than morphine. It can be 1,000 times stronger than morphine, or in some cases, it can be 10,000 times stronger than morphine. If you're talking about things like carfentanil, methoxy, fentanyl, sufentanil, alfentanil, thiofentanil, and remifentanil, all of these can be up to 10,000 times stronger, just absorbing it. Airborne particle, one airborne particle that would be so light that it would actually float and be invisible to the human eye, could be enough to incapacitate or even kill a small room full of people. And so that is very, very concerning that these people who are putting it on the streets, one, they don't even realize it's fentanyl in most cases. And number two, they have no clue just how powerful that fentanyl is because they got it from a dealer who gets it from a dealer who gets it from a dealer who ultimately had it smuggled in here from Mexico, which was ultimately first produced through raw materials in China. And sadly, too, these overdose victims, when we talk to their friends, go through their cell phone, usually the person they got it from was a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a brother, somebody they've gone to high school with, who got it from a guy they went to high school with, who's a friend of a brother or a sibling. It's oftentimes close people who are now living with the guilt that they thought they were providing oxycodone, which we all know can be deadly if you're taking it for a non-medical reason, but it ended up being fentanyl. And even small halving of those pills can absolutely be deadly for people who do not have that kind of tolerance. And so now they're not only living with the guilt that they killed their spouse, they killed their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their high school buddy, but now they're looking at homicide charges tied to that. So that is very concerning. But just to give you a little bit of a glimpse at just how powerful certain types of fentanyl can be, some of you may remember when in 2002, a terrorist organization run by a woman, she called herself the Black Widow. This was a Russian terrorist organization. They took over a prison, a movie theater rather, over in Russia, and they took the entire movie theater hostage. And the Russian special forces thought a good idea would be to pump an undisclosed chemical agent into that theater and just knock everyone out, and then we'll just ride in and arrest the bad guys and rescue the good guys. And as you can see there, over 170 people were killed, including 133 hostages that ended up being fentanyl that they pumped into the air ducts in that theater. You couldn't smell it. They didn't know it was there. As you can see, 170 people, including 133 hostages, were killed. Of course, they dismissed this and never fully disclosed what that agent was. Until later, we found out that agent was fentanyl. What variation, whether it was sufentanil, omefentanil, carfentanil, we do not know. But clearly, they did not know just how powerful the agent was, or they wouldn't have put it in there and put that many hostages at risk. And we see it takes on many different forms. As I said, the most common form, and sadly, we're seeing probably 7 to 10 overdoses per night just at the Oklahoma City hospitals. That does include all of our other medical facilities throughout the state and in Tulsa. But just in Oklahoma City hospitals from these M30 counterfeits that you see there in the upper left picture there, that's really the most common. And again, side by side, most users can't tell the difference. But it can be in many forms. That Tylenol pill that you see in the middle of the screen, that was fentanyl. But it was pressed to look like Tylenol for 2 reasons. One, to try to fool customs. And number 2, somebody could carry it in their purse at work, through an airport, a teenager at school. So again, it's a way to disguise their drug use in plain sight. That black bag there on the upper right, we purchased that undercover as Mexican tar, black tar heroin. It looks just like it, felt just like it. It was priced the same, but when we bought it and tested it, it was 100% fentanyl. There was no tar heroin in it. Just below it is a kilo of heroin that we purchased undercover. And again, when we tested it, there was no heroin in it whatsoever. That was all fentanyl, which was the same price, but incredibly profitable because it was just a fraction to manufacture that compared to what a true kilo of heroin would have cost the cartel out on the streets. And so, and then the lower right, the lower left, those colorful pills, those were all being sold in Oklahoma City, and we intercepted those, sold as ecstasy. And obviously ecstasy is something that will definitely target our kids, 13 to about 23-year-olds in the club scenes and at concerts. So very concerning that they were selling these pills, even stamped, as you can see, some of them there, stars on them, Mitsubishi, the typical type of symbols you would typically see on ecstasy, but every one of these pills tested positive for fentanyl. There was no ecstasy in it. So they don't always know what they're getting. And that is what is so concerning, that these kids will have a false sense of security if they've already had ecstasy in the past. that this will be the same response. If they've already been abusing oxycodone and they take another one and they think it's going to be the same response and it ends up being fentanyl and they end up back in a hospital with an overdose. We have seen fentanyl packaged as marijuana keef, which is kind of the leftover residue when you're processing the flowery material from a marijuana plant. There's kind of this leftover what they call keef. It can have small amounts of THC in it, but this was all packaged as marijuana keef, and they called them moon rocks, and it was kind of keef or marijuana that's mixed with fentanyl. And then down below, there was actual flower marijuana that could easily have been sold had we not intercepted it, and it has been intercepted other places around the US. Marijuana, that is simply the flower marijuana buds, but they test positive for traces of marijuana that's been laced into that product. And to the left there, this was a lab that we found producing counterfeit ecstasy. It looked just like the Xanax bars, excuse me, not ecstasy, Xanax. It was counterfeit Xanax. They looked just like those kind of lightish green, lightish blue Xanax bars, but it was 100% fentanyl. But this pill press and the stamps and the die casts were all made side by side. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference, that they were not actually getting Xanax, they were getting fentanyl. And then that far right, they were mass producing some of those counterfeit ecstasy tablets and fake Xanax. And then this pill press was found in the back of a liquor store up in the Tulsa area, again, where they were mass producing their own pills, just buying that raw powder off the internet, off the dark web, and in some cases buying their own stamps, buying the machine, and then mass producing them. The next generation, though, certainly when you get, you know, kind of a tolerance to opiates, and many of them then move on to heroin, and then they get a tolerance to heroin, they're moving on to fentanyl. You can't stay in that same spot. There's like every other drug that you're either going to have to use something more powerful or use more frequently, but even then they're going to get a tolerance. And so kind of the next generation that is contributing to so many overdoses in the US right now is what's called benzodope. This is fentanyl, but it's being cut with atezolem. And atezolem is kind of a very powerful benzodiazepine that gives them a fentanyl type high with just an absolute shutdown. I mean, the benzo, the atezolem is so powerful when smoked with the fentanyl that there's not a slow drift off like you might see with somebody smoking heroin or fentanyl or injecting it. This will be almost an immediate where they're just gone. They're just completely out of it and incapacitated, sometimes for 30 minutes to 3 hours. And it's typically sold in a small rock form, as you can see in that picture, smoked off of aluminum foil. But that is what they call benzodope, and that is just another type of fentanyl that's mixed with atezolem out on the streets, and it's becoming more and more popular. That's not even the final generation. The next that is causing, I think, some of the biggest could be credited for the most amount of overdoses when it comes to fentanyl is called trank dope, or trank. And this is fentanyl, but it is overwhelmingly xylazine. An animal tranquilizer is the primary cutting agent, and it's about 24-to-1 xylazine to fentanyl. And so this, when smoked or injected, is absolutely just almost instantly putting the person out. They're bending over and almost just frozen in time. And it is even more powerful than the benzo dope or the benzofentanyl. And this is what they call trank dope. And what's concerning about this is because it is about 24-to-1 xylazine to fentanyl, it is not responding typically to Narcan. Narcan's been our game changer. It's been our lifesaver because of the fentanyl and the opiate overdoses being able to be reversed by naloxone. But this is typically not responding to Narcan, and that is becoming more of the preferred drug among fentanyl addicts. It's a drug that will not respond to Narcan. And xylazine, if you know much about it, is a drug that, again, it's a large animal horse tranquilizer, but as soon as you put it in your body's going to want to get rid of it. And oftentimes it will come out through abscesses in the injection sites, but we even see it in other places in the body where it is causing these abscesses. It's trying to escape. And there's 100 different reasons why these infections start to spread on the arms, the fingers. We've seen many fentanyl addicts who are using trank dope losing their fingers from infection. They're losing toes. They've got sores that are all the way down to the bone. And if treated in time, the recovery rate is really pretty good. But again, if you're out on the streets, you're a homeless drug addict, getting proper medical care is way down on your priority list. You're about getting out of the pain, getting out of the dope sick. And so instead of getting a small abscess treated on the tip of their finger, or maybe just above the foot, suddenly now their whole leg or their whole hand may become infected, and they lose it before they can get proper medical treatment. So trank dope, or this next generation of fentanyl, is one that is very, very concerning. But again, there's so much coming in here, and our agency is staying very, very busy here in Oklahoma, simply because the biggest points of entry for any drug, including fentanyl, is Tijuana, San Diego, it's Phoenix, and it's Ciudad, El Paso. And if you look at a map, those ports of entry are going to bisect in downtown Oklahoma City. It's either coming up I-35 or across the country in I-40. And so we are seizing some of the largest fentanyl seizures of any law enforcement agency in the country, coming right through Oklahoma, either destined for here, or oftentimes it's destined for someplace else. Back in January of this year, that was K9 Yaco that got approximately 9 kilos of fentanyl. That's enough to make 90,000 dosage units. And I didn't put a picture in here, but in January, or excuse me, in July, one of our agents in her K9 Trixie ended up getting 26 pounds of raw fentanyl, which would be enough to make nearly 500,000 of those counterfeit M30s or counterfeit Xanaxes. So we're very pleased to get those off the streets. But as I said, it is our number one killer in terms of the rapid rate of it. Our number one drug killer continues to be meth, and I think it always will be. But as far as what is the quickest rising drug death category, as you can see there, without a doubt, it is fentanyl. Nearly a 200% increase. Nearly 300% increase from 2019, from 54 to 137 to 299. Again, 299 pales in comparison to the 600 in meth, but we don't know how many of these overdoses are being underreported because of Narcan. Many of the users or their friends are using Narcan to reverse that effect, and then they go right back oftentimes to using again. They're in the home or out on the streets. And so we believe that 299 deaths in 2021, and by the way, we're on pace for almost 400 in 2022. We believe those are very, very conservative numbers, because we will never know how many overdoses were stopped because of Narcan. But we're always concerned because they're using fentanyl as a primary cutting agent for heroin, but we're also now finding it in methamphetamine. We're finding it in cocaine and marijuana. And the more deaths that are reported, scary is, as I said, the more popular that drug becomes. We've been fortunate here in Oklahoma not to see these clusters. Like this was just one example, 32 heroin overdoses reported in 24 hours. There were 47 overdoses reported in 40 hours down in Atlanta, Georgia, and nearly 48 overdoses in Atlantic City in a 2-day period. You can always tell when a new batch of fentanyl or a new batch of heroin has entered a city, because you'll start to see these overdose deaths, and then word gets out on the streets that this particular brand, whether it's Super Buick, Body Bag, there'll be some catchy name for it on the streets that all the addicts are seeking, Trank, Benzo dope. They will all be out on the streets seeking that if they just heard a bunch of people overdose, because in their minds, that's strong enough to get them back where they are. You can give fentanyl to an opioid addict, and if they're used to Trank, fentanyl's not even going to touch them. Where a heroin addict moves on to fentanyl, fentanyl will take them to, it'll shoot them out of reality. But again, everybody gets a tolerance to it, and you're going to need the next generation. And it's scary to think what could be the next generation after trank dope or benzo fentanyl. But we've been very fortunate, as I said, not to see these clusters. Our closest would be 3 deaths in one Oklahoma City home linked to die of fentanyl. And so we're not sure if they had breathed it from something that was brought into the home or something that they had ingested. So, and that's why we treat it differently, because we don't know whether we're dealing with a powder that is just as strong as heroin, or 100 times stronger than morphine, or 10,000 times stronger than morphine. And this is where we have to treat powder much different today than we did even 5 years ago. You know, law enforcement 5-10 years ago would find a white baggie on the side of the road in the console of a car or the pocket of an arrestee. You pull out your test kit and you test that white powder, and you know it's meth, you know it's cocaine, it's a particular drug. But now the days of doing that could send law enforcement to the hospital, and could even be fatal. We've had 2 law enforcement overdoses just since July that are linked to the absorption of particles from something that was either in the vehicle or on the suspect that they were dealing with. And so we started partnering 3 years ago with the National Guard and started training with them on how to work a fentanyl lab safely. These are level A suits. This is their bioterrorism. That is how serious they take this, that strong enough fentanyl, certain variations like carfentanil could absolutely be as lethal a bioagent as ricin, or some other anthrax, things like that, if it were released into the air, as was witnessed by what happened in that Russian movie theater in 2002. Could you imagine if some terrorist got a hold of fentanyl and wanted to cause mass casualties? Getting something like fentanyl into the air vents of a theater absolutely could do that. One of our first labs, our first fentanyl lab that we're aware of, we shut down in 2017 down in Lexington, Oklahoma. In this particular case, it was kind of unique. He admitted that he was making fentanyl gummies, where he would buy the raw fentanyl off the internet. He bought the gelatin, and then he had these little plastic containers very similar to ice trays, but they were kind of long strips, and he would mix the fentanyl in with the gelatin and then manufacture it that way, and putting these fentanyl gummies. And certainly that's a concern, because that's something like anything that would resemble a candy. Now you're appealing to children who could run across that, and they end up in the hospital or even worse. And so we're very concerned that fentanyl can take a lot of forms, from a rock to a pill to a gummy to a powder. And again, accidental absorption is a very real threat for anybody who's in healthcare, especially those working ERs, where law enforcement may bring somebody in, or a family member may bring somebody in, and your first instinct is administer, care, and you don't stop to think, could this person's shirt or their hands, something you're getting ready to touch, you're getting ready to maybe remove in an ER shirt that could disturb particles, removing their pants, emptying their pockets to give the family their car keys and wallet from the patient. A white baggie comes out. In the past, it wouldn't be the type of panic that we needed, that it could be today if suddenly one of those ER nurses or a doctor goes down and they cannot explain it. That's why we've always said, anytime, whether you're a law enforcement officer, you're a first responder of any type, fire, EMS, to ER doctors, anybody that might come, even medical clinics, some of these after hours clinics where somebody's coming in and they're having difficulty. Certainly childcare workers, people go to in-home visits. We always tell you, keep an eye on your own health. Tell people that you were with in a home, or you may have had a patient, so that if something happens 3 hours later, your husband can call 911 and say, oh, well, she also said that she was in a home tonight doing a child welfare visit and suspected there could have been drugs in the house. And that could really help first responders narrow in on what exactly is going on here. So obviously some of those symptoms, these are just a few, but you observe any of these, or one of your colleagues, if you yourself or one of your colleagues is experiencing any of these, And they weren't sick before, but suddenly they are now. And what happened since then? Well, they were in this house, or they dealt with this patient, or this law enforcement officer did a search of this car. We can start to go, okay, this sounds like some type of breathing, because some of it can be very slow for these symptoms, but some can be immediate. We've had law enforcement who literally, they put their head inside the vehicle after the suspect was in custody to start searching, and within seconds of putting their head just inside the vehicle to start looking under seats or console, their lungs froze up. They literally said, I could not take a breath. I could not inhale. They were having a fentanyl overdose, and their partner, one of them most recently, hit their partner 3 times, took 3 times of the Narcan to get him to where he could start breathing again. And that he was just literally, it was a matter of seconds from him starting to search that vehicle that he started doing this. So some can be slow, like just some coughing, slight drowsiness, talking about being nauseated, blood pressure slowly dropping, to something almost instant where they're passing out. Those are things to watch yourself and watch your partners, your coworkers. And as I said, this has been a lifesaver. We carry it with us. We recommend that anybody who is in the medical field carry it with them, but even family members, if you've got a loved one, a mother, maybe you've got elderly who are on pain medicine, it's also a game changer, not just for recreational overdoses, but for our elderly who may have forgotten, did I take my medicine this afternoon? And so they take a second dose. So we're seeing it more commonly kept in the medicine cabinets and available for people who are not even in the medical field or have recreational drug use in their family. So we would certainly encourage that. It has absolutely, as I said, been a game changer. But the concern is we're seeing more and more of these synthetic opiates hitting the streets from China and other places that will not respond to Narcan, because there's less and less of the fentanyl, and there's more of these other substances that can mimic the effects of an opioid, but are not in the same category. Thus, they do not respond to naloxone. And that is becoming more of a concern for all of us in law enforcement and the medical community. This is the most important slide that I'm going to present this afternoon. And if there's something going on, you've got questions, maybe even a loved one who's got issues with drugs in their family, they don't know who to call, who to turn to, who to just take a look into it, please let us know. We also have experts in support and addiction recovery that we can put you in touch with. But if there's just anything that I personally can do for your department and any of your colleagues, I want you to keep my number handy, take a screenshot, keep that on your phone so you can reach out to me anytime. You can go to Facebook and send us a private message at the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. Those all come to my desk as well. Any DM or direct message to our Facebook page comes to my office. But please don't hesitate to give us an email, give us a call. And at that, I'm going to go back to our screen here and see if anybody has any questions. I'd be more than happy to help answer for you.
Mark, so you were kind of talking about it, but I noticed, or somebody told me about a couple of situations in the jail where, they had the inmate, go down and wondered why, and then, the attendants got there and started working on him, and then they started having symptoms, and they figured out that it was the fentanyl. Does that happen? Like you were mentioning, does that happen a lot?
It is happening more frequently. It is because of, again, it's easier to smuggle it. Even an inmate could have it under their nails, enough under their fingernails that you're not necessarily, I mean, obviously law enforcement, when they're booking them in, they're going to run through their pockets. They're going to look for white baggies. They will do the body cavity checks, but the fentanyl could be even smuggled in just under their nails, small amounts of very potent fentanyl. And certainly it could still be on their clothes as well. So it's not always to smuggle it in. Sometimes it was just still on them when they were picked up. And yes, just brushing something off your jacket, law enforcement have done that. And the airborne particle got inhaled. And we've had law enforcement with just simple particles that got on their clothes from being in one of these homes ended up having a medical emergency. Some are more susceptible than others too. Some people, you could have 5 people in a room and they all use fentanyl, and one could have very little reaction, and then the other person dies, and then you got 3 people in the middle who have varying reactions. And so it's frightening to think that so many people are getting a false sense of security when you've got these different drugs at parties, or a batch that comes in and a bunch of people are fine with it, so their friends are sharing it, and then 5 or 6 kids end up in the ER and 30 kids don't. And so there really is no rhyme or reason why one particular batch is going to do what it does. Every person's different, as you all know, and every drug's different. And when they take it can play a big role in how their body responds. So yes, in the jails, in just even on the side of the road doing searches, people before police even get there, like I said, fire department, ambulance rolls up on an overdose. My son's an EMT for EMSA, and he's working 1 or 2 overdoses almost every night. And they're finding these people everywhere from the sidewalk at 7-Eleven to sitting in a booth in a Denny's restaurant at 4 in the morning. They're getting called out there. And so they have to just assume that it's fentanyl, and they have to assume that body has fentanyl on it. And so they wear the protective masks and gloves, and certainly dispose of all of that. But you just have to assume now that fentanyl could be present and treated as such, and prepare for the worst, but hope for the best when you do encounter an overdose anymore.
Good. Other questions from Mark? I mean, this is a chance to ask.
And I would stress too, and in so many of these cases, because I also deal with a lot of addicts in recovery, and support groups for addicts in recovery and families of addicts. And keep in mind, so many of these people started at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old from just taking medicine out of people's medicine cabinets. I can't stress enough that to really safeguard the medicine in your own homes. Most of us will never have cocaine, meth, or heroin, but any one of us could fall down a flight of stairs. And tonight we've got Roxaset sitting in an unlocked cabinet, some of the most powerful drugs on the planet. A lot of times the teenager, or even your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law comes over, they're going through your bathroom cabinets trying to feed an addiction. So many of these addicts say the number one place they get their drug is not on the streets, it's out of the medicine cabinet of a friend or relative. And so we don't want anybody to live with the guilt of knowing that your son-in-law, your daughter-in-law, your teenage son or his friend died from something you had in your cabinet and you should have thrown away 3 years ago because you haven't used it. So really take this opportunity also to go through your own cabinets and get rid of any type of medicine you don't need. And if you do need it, safeguard it. Put it someplace where it's not real obvious. We're all guilty of putting it in medicine cabinets and nightstand drawers, and someplace where this first place an addict is going to look. We also have 187 drug disposal boxes in law enforcement lobbies across the state, and most Walgreens up by the pharmacy counter now have a metal box where you can get rid of anything you no longer need. So we can all take those little steps, even if it's not fentanyl affecting our family. All of us have medicine in the cabinet that could be targeted, because even if you can't get high on it, like blood pressure medicine, your teenagers will steal it. They'll take it to school, and then they trade those and sell them for marijuana and other things. And they tell their friends that it's Xanax or it's benzos or something. So we've seen overdoses with all kinds of drugs that you can't even get high from because they took it for a non-medical reason.
Deborah Wilkinson, did you have something you wanted to ask or bring up?
So I just had a question about if you could kind of reiterate about the fentanyl found in marijuana. I know a lot of young people are smoking it, and it's legal in some areas. Could you kind of elaborate on that again?
Yes, and I'll tell you, I can't stress enough, that is very, very rare, because most drug users know what they want, and they know what feeling they're chasing. And for a marijuana user to get something that's laced with fentanyl, 9 out of 10 are not going to like it because it's going to take them places they didn't prepare to go. But there are some people who have got such a tolerance to marijuana just because of long-term use and the strength that we're dealing with today. The tolerance isn't such a distant concept anymore. We're talking 19, 20-year-old kids who now don't get high smoking regular weed. And there's plenty of people out there who are looking to capture that market by making theirs special. And one of the cheap ways to just basically send your marijuana to the next level is to spike it with something like fentanyl. And there is a demand for certain types of marijuana that have been laced with fentanyl, but your teenager's not going to know the difference, whether they're buying some oil or buying flower marijuana from somebody, whether it's been laced or not. And so that is very, very concerning. We won't know, and they won't know until they end up in the hospital from a very serious side effect. So yes, absolutely, we are seeing marijuana more frequently now than ever before having fentanyl in it, but it's still not mainstream.
So just to put a plug in, Mark will be talking with us later at some point about a youth and marijuana. So you want to tune in for that. I was going to ask Mark, what do you think about like the usefulness of Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services program, where you can, order your own naloxone. They got the fentanyl test strips, the disposable opiate disposable bags. I mean, do people use those? Are they making use of that kind of stuff?
Well, certainly the Narcan is. From what I hear, it's hard for them to even keep the supplies on hand, and that's a good thing that people are wanting to have it just in case that you want to have it, but pray you never need it. As far as the test strips, the jury's kind of still out on that because I know most addicts in their addiction are not going to even take the time to test it. They really don't care because they're so desperate and they're so sick that if they even suspect it's fentanyl, that's good enough for them. And if it's strong fentanyl that could kill them, well, that's even better because most of them have looked at us and said, I'm already dead. Don't come and talk to me and try to scare me into thinking, oh, I could overdose. Most of them have overdosed 30 times out on the streets and they go back to it. It's not about death. It's about getting rid of that sickness and feeding what the brain is craving. And so the test strips, as far as, somebody using those to see, are they really getting oxycodone to get high from illegally, or is it laced with fentanyl? It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Either way, they're looking to get high off of a drug that could kill them anyway, even if they're taking just pharmaceutical legal oxycodone. So I'm not sure if we're going to see that being a game changer as far as saving lives. But if it does somehow, somebody tests their marijuana and it turns out to have fentanyl and their test strip turns color, good for them. But most of the people who are going to get it, they requested it, and that's exactly what they're looking for.
If you need information on the department's website and how to do it, get in contact with us, and we'll show. But that's a good. I ordered some to have it at the house. It came in about a week, and is there instructions and the whole bit? Very nice.
Yeah. And mental health, you can get it there. I've ordered some and had people order it off the CDC. You can order it from there. Absolutely good to just have around because, like I said, you never know it. I keep some in my car because I may be sitting at a red light and somebody's flagging somebody down. I see a guy right on the side of the road. I never know at an intersection, a homeless guy, somebody may be in trouble. I want to have it with me, but certainly for your own relatives who may accidentally overdose. So it is good to have around, and it can do zero harm if they're not having an opioid overdose and you give it to them. That's the beauty of it. If it's a cocaine overdose or something like that, you're not going to kill them by shooting Narcan up their nostrils. So,
other questions, comments for Mark?
let me stress too, just real quickly too, if y'all do happen to run across something, either professionally or personally, obviously your first instinct may be to open up, take a look, take a whiff, just back away, call 911, tell them you found it, and have local law enforcement or our agency come out, and we will take a look at it and safely dispose of it. So like I said, either professionally or personally, you find something in your kid's backpack, it's a white powder that drops on the floor, don't get the dust mop and the broom and clean it up. If you even suspect it could be fentanyl, if your son or daughter, for example, has already had an issue with pain pills and other things like that, it very well could be fentanyl. Even if they got an issue with meth or cocaine, we're now finding fentanyl cut in meth and cocaine. So just any kind of drug like that, please do not take the risk and let law enforcement come deal with it.
Well, very good. Going once, going twice. Comments, questions for Mark. This would be the time. So Jennifer said the Facebook page, Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, says that the location is in Tulsa. Is this the correct page? And it's oklmready.org to get free naloxone.
Yeah, that wouldn't be our website. We don't offer it free. If that's a Department of Mental Health, we may have a link on our site on how to go get it. But yeah, I couldn't tell you whether it's Tulsa or what it's probably just a link to either the Department of Mental Health or the CDC website where you can order it. But I don't have a lot of knowledge exactly about the actual providers of that other than the link on our website.
You can go to the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse website, and I think if you just search for
Yep.
naloxone or Narcan, it'll pop up the page. And you kind of scroll down the end of the page. And it says if you want to order, then you just click there. You don't even have to provide your actual name or any of those kind of things unless they're going to send it to you. Then you got to put your address. But basically, it's pretty confidential. But I think you can find it that way. If for some reason you can't, let us know, and we'll send it to you. Okay, Mark, we appreciate the presentation. Very informative, very good knowing about what's going on in Oklahoma. Look forward to your next presentation on marijuana and youth and how that's shaping up in the state.
Yeah, it's ever changing and not for the better, I'm afraid. But yeah, we'll get into that, I believe, in October. I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. All right, so we'll go ahead and let everybody start their weekend early. We appreciate it. Y'all have a safe weekend, and we'll look for you next week when we talk about families and substance use. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.